I'll start on my first word. Here's a little perspective from your local old depressed millennial debater who's had multiple miserable career changes. Life is intrinsically devoid of purpose and meaning, but we live in a world where that purpose, where we try to fill in that purpose shaped gap in our life, is oftentimes through our job, our function. Humans are societal animals, but when we feel like we don't have a function or we feel like we're bad at that function, it is purposeless and miserable. We're going to do 4 points of framing. One, what does this hip mark often look like? Two things here. First, I think it is going to be reasonably specific, but not like overly specific. That is, I don't think the hit mark is going to be so broad that it's like, you're good at critical thinking, you're good at being nice. I think it is going to be reasonable enough to the point where it is going to be specifically tailored towards something that like you could reasonably understand, like you are good at like math, or you're specifically good at like quantum physics, or specifically good at interpreting Spanish, but not like so specific that it's like you would only be good at doing like linear algebra in Princeton in 2017. It'll be relevant and accessible to the time that you're in with a reasonable extent. Also, it's also going to be on your hip, so you don't have to show it to people because most people wear pants that cover their hip. We think that's going to be fine. Two, I want to talk about what the world looks like right now. In the status quo, we live in a world that already assigns people specific things like the idea that because you are like Asian, you should do stuff that's like good at math, right? We already have even more specific systems like the caste system that because of things like class or just the genetic makeup that you have from when you were born, there are arbitrary like social roles that have been assigned to people. Our argument is that even if you think that there will be some degree of stigmatization and grouping, this is a comparatively better grouping. One, because it is arbitrary and not tied to specific genetic factors. It is going to be randomly assigned. Two, because it is actually accurate towards the kind of skills that you do. And then three, it isn't going to have these specific cultural stigmas attached to it, given that everybody, regardless of the class they're in, could get a specific thing like this. So given that there is a natural distribution of how privileged people are when they choose to set up society, there will never be like a stigma against the guy that's speaking Spanish because the rich people also have the same chance of being that person as a poor individual. Third point of framing, this is just extra information, right? Like I don't think this is something that forces people to follow what the hit mark does. And note that we can intuit this empirically. We already have some degree of information we can gain about our talents. Tall people know they might be good at basketball. I, because of things that might not be genetic, but just because of class, know that because I took a lot of high-level math classes as a young kid, I have the privilege and predisposition to being good at things that have STEM. Our argument is this is an additional piece of information that is more useful, given that it ties to things like internal talents and future, like what you would be good at in the future, things that you don't have the ability to ascertain now. If it doesn't align with your passions, you don't have to follow it, but it is just good to know. Two arguments then. First, this just makes people's lives dramatically better. It imparts meaning in a lot of ways. A couple of reasons. First, I think many people just like doing what they're good at, but they don't know what that is. It feels good to be rewarded either through pay, it feels good to be rewarded through praise, it feels good to take ownership in the work that you do, given that you are spending 8 hours of your day doing it. So you want to know that you're doing something that's good. Importantly, people are often without purpose. They don't know what they would be good at. They don't, and maybe opposition will make arguments that you should still experiment to find what you're good at, and that is valuable. Maybe that is valuable for some people, but the people we should be prioritizing are the people for whom, absent this, they would feel great amounts of mental health harms because they feel like they aren't able to be a meaningful contributor to society, that they are doing jobs that they hate and wasting a third of their life every day, clocking in and out of meaningless jobs. I do not think that is a rewarding experience, and the ability to transition between jobs is something that very privileged people might have, but I think a lot of people are oftentimes forced to stick with certain jobs and don't have the privilege of switching or taking time off to be unemployed. So the first job that they get or the way that they orient their lives with a specific career is really important. Third, let's say for the people who their job does not align with their passion, what happens to them? I think that we make it such that you are better able to use the other 16 hours of your life. What do I mean by this? Let's say I'm not talented at writing, but writing is my passion. What I am talented at is being like a CS coder. Our argument is that when I know what I'm specifically good at, given that I'm likely going to have to do some kind of job to put food on the table anyway, I am more likely to do a job that gives me more free time because I don't have to work really, really hard to be able to meet key performance indicators. I have more money, so I can do things like go on vacations or take time off and have savings necessary to pursue those other passions. It is not many people who have jobs that align with passions, because oftentimes a lot of passions are not things you can make a living out of. A lot of times passions are just things that are not accessible jobs to you. So you have to do the best with what you've got. Even if the job you get isn't perfectly aligned with your hit mark, it is probably like you could probably get something that is approximately useful to us. So what I mean by this is like, let's say it says that I'm good at like linear algebra. Even if I'm not able to get a job that specifically requires linear algebra skills, I'm probably good at other things related to math, right? Like it is useful information, even if I cannot get the exact thing the hit mark wants. So I think this is really useful for people to have that meaning. Second thing then, societal, and then the impact of this is that there's less opportunity cost, mental health, all of these things. Second argument then, on the societal level, how are we better for society? Couple of reasons. First, I think society will just be economically way more efficient on our side of the house. That is, that if you look at like society historically, we will have more specialization, given that people will be doing things that they're good at. We'll just have better scientists, because the people who would choose to pursue science are doing things that will have better output than the people who otherwise would have done it. Moreover, we would say that a lot of people just engage in wasted labor, either because they aren't able to get a job because they don't know what they would be good at, or they are doing things that they're naturally bad at, not because they love them, but because they feel like they have to. Closing. Oh, yeah, closing quickly.
Oh, yeah. Can you explain what the intrinsic link between doing something you're good at and feeling happier while doing it is? And in a market economy where the vast majority of jobs that are required has nothing to do with what people like or are good at, but is more so based on the current marketing and manufacturing demand?
Yeah, this is what I said, right? It might not be the perfect job, but if you're just able to do something you're more talented at, it feels good to just like earn more money or feel like you're good at it. I know like not everyone has access to their ideal job, but we would also say that society probably orients towards like, if you show your hit mark, you are more likely to get that job. So we lower the bar by which it takes to get that job. On your side of the house, even if I would want to do the job I would be good at, I don't have proof that that is something I would be good at. It is much easier for these people to get jobs that they would be good at, and then we give you impact score that's important. Second, on narratives, and Muzamil will explain this later, the counterfactual is things like stereotype. It is things like, oh, we assign roles based off of family or caste or genetics or color, and these are things that are much worse, right? Because these are things that A, are tied to genetics that you cannot break from, B, are tied along class and historical stigma lines, and then 3 are oftentimes things that where there's a stigma attached to a specific kind of job. They are oftentimes jobs that you pay less because we have that stigma. For all of these reasons, proud to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for that very fine speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Leader of Opposition here.
Hi, I'm trying to share a video chat, but it says it's not available for more than 25 users. I was wondering if like that's like that could be changed.
That's a Discord thing, I think. It's
probably
yeah, you probably have to upgrade a server or something to change that. So
okay. Well, I guess I will just not debate with my face then. Before I begin, huge thanks to Ryan for like literally carrying me on my back and doing like the greatest carry job that anyone has ever done in debate. Thanks to everyone I've competed against. Thanks to thanks to a whole bunch of people that I don't have the time to mention now. All right, I'm gonna begin in 3, 2, 1. I'm pretty shitty at debate. And if I were told straight up that I'm better at something else, if my Cutie mark was something like writing in cursive, I would probably not pursue debating. But because I don't know for sure, and because I'm encouraged in the status quo to pursue a variety of different things, I found friends, communities, a hobby that I'm certainly bad at, but I derive meaning in it. And you will certainly never try to explore your passions and what you could potentially have fun from, but things that you are bad at in Gov's world. First argument. By the way, all rebuttal is going to be integrated. Ryan is going to pick up some slack that I dropped maybe. First argument. Self-exploration and diversification of passions. Let's talk about framing, because on either side, people are going to want to know or discover what they are most talented at. There are economic reasons for this, there are social reasons for this, there are personal reasons for this, and we can kind of take into account everything that PM says, right? You get paid more, etc., right? So currently, people must search to find their talent. You do multiple activities, you pursue different classes. This becomes a social norm, and institutions arise to help people pursue different interests. This process is extremely good for introspection. What we hear as a preemption from PM is that privileged people are the only ones that are able to self-explore. A couple of responses. One, like the vast majority of institutions are incentivized to provide this level of self-exploration. They encourage this, right? Because schools acknowledge that people don't know what they want to do in the very first place. Because countries and institutions and governments also acknowledge that people don't really know what to do, and so they encourage educational institutions to explore and encourage like this level of exploration. So, for instance, like this permeates into every facet of your life. This looks like parents telling you, oh, you should like pursue a lot of different things and tell me what you're good at. This looks like primary schools or secondary schools. But secondly, most things are not related to jobs, right? So when PM says that you don't get a lot of flexibility in changing your job. Well, A, you would probably do this sort of changing and self-exploration in things like primary school and secondary school, where there are institutions that are set up for you to self-explore. But B, there are many things that your Cutie mark can apply to that are not related to jobs. Things like experimenting with music, comedy, humor, specific things in school. Gov says that you're likely to not do much exploration of your... No, sorry. In Gov's world, you're very likely to not do as much exploration of your passions and talents. Why is this? 4 reasons. 1, people feel like exploration is less worthy of their time because you already know what you're good at. 2, capitalistic norms which try to maximize profitability would have evolved on their side more and would be emphasized more in order to emphasize that people should focus primarily on what they know that and what they are good at. 3, failure is less normalized on your guys' side, and there's a collective action problem, right? You only try new things when others do so as well. That's the reason as to why it happens in the status quo, because there is this norm of self-exploration in primary school, secondary school, hell, even in adult life. Now, when other people experiment less, you fear looking weird and being the odd one out. Fourth of all, you're more likely to lock yourself in a certain path on their side from a very young age. There are a lot of harmful impacts that arise from not being able to self-explore. 1, I think that self-exploration tells you more about yourself. You form different communities, you form different experiences. These experiences are different per hobby you have because they are unique, right? In that you are good at, like, given the fact that you're good at certain things or bad at certain things, surely the experiences that you derive from these things are different, right? For instance, I listened to Structural Reasons recently, and I listened to Ashish podcast. Ashish talks about how he's not great at music, but he finds joy in doing these things. He would never have found music and would never have found and cultivated these hobbies in the very first place if he was told straight up from birth that he would be bad at music. These things are unique to different passions, right? And this is very important. And the second harmful impact is that you're going to have to diversify eventually, probably on both sides. You go to school, you have friends, family, etc. You need to interact with different people who probably have different interests from you. Your job probably requires different skills. So A, you're better equipped to deal with things that you're not good at on our side because you're more equipped to deal with failure. And B, you're probably more well-rounded on our side. What else do they say? Doing what you're best at is good for you emotionally and the economy. They say it's good for you because of this emotional impact. I have 2 responses to this. 1, doing what you like isn't necessarily the thing that is happiest for you. Just because you are good at something, such as, like imagine like prodigy, like 5-year-old violinist, doesn't mean that you derive happiness from it. Also, many things aren't monetizable. The impact that they claim is that you can get paid more at your job. You can be good at many non-job related things, right? Like for instance, like work, like if you're really good at writing in cursive, sure, you can get a salary bonus, but there's certainly a maximal limit as to how much you can get paid. But 2, on our side, you don't know what's best for you, and that you can still be convinced that you're doing what you're meant for. Economic impact, right? You will probably not succeed in damaging the economy if you get C's and CS, right? If you get a C in CS, you'll probably realize on our side that it probably isn't the path for you. Before I move on to the second argument, I'll take a point.
Your example in Ashish proves that you can pursue something not because you're good at it, but because it just makes you happy. Why can't that happen on our side too? Like you explore music even though you're not good at it.
Right, but because of everything that I've said before, because there's probably a stigma attached from you from refraining you from pursuing your passions, because there's probably capitalistic incentives that tell you that you are wasting time if you are not pursuing what is on your Cutie mark, you will never find these passions in the very first place, right? So even if you were to enjoy a lot of these passions later on, our point is that the premise never occurs, and that you never get incentivized to do that in the very first place. Second argument, mental health, 2 mechanisms. 1, first mechanism. This is that this house prefers a world motion, which means that there are centuries of human histories with Cutie marks. The problem is that the vast majority of people, for the vast majority of history, their daily lives were almost entirely concentrated in very specific activities, things like agriculture, religion, family, and there are structural reasons like poverty and development. The consequence is that you feel extremely dissatisfied with your life because you are probably born with a physical marker that tells you what you're best at, but because there are structural reasons around you, you are probably unable able to pursue that cutie mark. And I don't only want to talk about history. I want to talk about general, like today, right? And that many people are unable to pursue their cutie mark. They lack the resources, they lack the time, they lack the flexibility. On the comparative, people know on either side that they aren't doing what they are best at. But on their side, you feel a lot worse. There's a certainty on your guys' side. You know for sure every morning when you wake up, you know for sure that you are not doing the thing that you're best at. On our side, you can at least justify that you're somewhat good at it. But secondly, even if you can pursue your cutie mark, there is a level of social hierarchy with what these cutie marks entail. Likely on their side, there was a norm emerging of sharing your cutie mark, right? This is an extension of our innate curiosity. Also, parents are going to see these cutie marks well before children understand them. This is also a premise of their case, right? People care about their cutie marks, care about utilizing them. So the problem is when people compare their marks and feel bad by comparison because their optimal talents seem inferior to others, right? For instance, if you're good at cursive writing, or but your friend is like a genius physicist, you feel a lot less inferior to other people. This is important because we take them at their best, because we're assuming that everyone is able to perfectly abide by their cutie mark, but we're still saying that this social hierarchy exists. PM wants to talk about the caste system, which is arising from arbitrary social rules, right? People love doing that shit, right? So people are going to do that shit even more on your guys' side, because we now have definitive proof that certain people have more value than other people, that people like genius coders exist and are probably more superior to people that are good at cursive writing. We're proud to oppose.
Right. I'd like to thank the leader of opposition for the very speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Deputy Prime Minister here.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yes.
Before I start, shout out to Dennis. Really enjoyed debating with Dennis. Dennis is the GOAT, and he is incredible at debate. It's been a great time. This has been a long time coming. Yeah. 3, 2, 1. The problem with the speech you just heard is that people don't just do what they're good at. I was very good at maths throughout the entirety of my childhood, but I still played video games. I still opted into debate because the only thing this tells you is what you are most talented at doing in life, not the variety of other talents that you could possibly have and the maximum number of things that you tend to explore on either side of the house. Why are you still likely to do this? Firstly, people often like releasing sessions after work. In many cases, you go talk to your friends, etc. on the comparative. These are all mental health release methods that you are likely to engage in. Second, you often enjoy lots of other stuff. So it is probably true that even if it is the case that you wanted to engage to some extent on outside of the house more, like in the particular thing that you're good at, I think you're still likely to do other things because you genuinely enjoy them, because you're curious about them. In many cases, you know you won't be particularly good at art, like I wasn't and I knew I would never be, but in many cases I'm still able to do this. But lastly, you already know to some extent what you are good at. This is done through genetic stereotyping, where if I'm an Asian, I'm told I will be good at math. On the comparative, we would posit that this is not a very good metric by which you determine these types of things, where you're already told that because you are tall, you ought to play basketball, where you're racially stereotyped into actively not being the Asian artist. I think that means that the comparative that exists is a much worse determinant marker that exists on their side of the house. Two things I'm going to talk about. First, why this leads to better productivity on the comparative, why this is just really, really good in terms of accessing the kind of meaning that we want to talk about, and secondly, why this necessarily is better for society on a whole. The first thing I want to weigh is just why it's likely the case that on the comparative, we get better jobs and other types of things on our side of the house. So here's the problem in opposition. Their entire analysis on exploration and the ability to do things that you are happy with is predicated on the capitalistic system actively allowing this. To self-explore, you often need lots of money. You need to be able to opt into a 10-hour job and also be able to go to a good private school. To access debate, you need to actively have lots of money to pay for the extracurricular classes. You need to go to a good university, etc. on the comparative. That means that structurally, self-exploration is often locked behind closed doors on opposition side of the house. It's very hard to find what you're good at, and in many cases, you're unlikely to actively feel that you're going to be good on the comparative at many things. I think that means that you're unlikely to be able to do these things on their side. Secondly, and this is super important, you often don't get jobs in the things you're good at anyway. It's very hard to find these types of things out, especially when the capitalistic system makes you work 16-hour days, where it emphasizes things like productivity on either side of the house. Note what this does to opposition's case. You can find you're good at art in their world. Maybe you do. The problem is that you still can never do this because your Asian parents will say you cannot make enough money through this. that it is impossible for you to actually get good at this. We are not paying for your classes etc. on the comparative. What changes then, and 3 ways you weigh this. 1. We're just likelier able to actively self-specialize significantly sooner. This means that on the comparative, you're able to focus and dedicate things that you actively want to do. Note the mechanism here. You are likely happy when you do things on the comparative that you are told to. The reason for this is twofold. 1. Social norms evolve around liking what your cutie mark does. Often you are trained about this in the lower age. You're often told that you're supposed to like this, and in many cases your friends and other communities that you made were around similar things. So at the point that I had a cutie mark on math, my parents enrolled me in math club, and all of my friends were like this, so I often developed the liking for it over time anyway. Secondly, people are happy when they engage in these types of things, which means you often recognize what kinds of careers you want, what are the ways that you actively engage in these types of things. Second piece of weighing, you get significantly more meaning and more money on our side of the house. Note that the best op claims that you can explore passions etc. The difference on our side is that yes, maybe some people have talents for writing cursive, but even then, you often know what you're significantly better at. That means I'm able to engage and actively get more money on our side of the house. This often looks like being able to opt into better jobs. It often means being able to specialize sooner and opt into the types of things that they wanted to talk about. What this means is more money, and this impacts in 2 ways. 1, just have more time to spend on your passion. So if I really like art, I can actually do art once I make money from my physicist day job and go out of it. This means that 16-hour days that we spend are actually really, really important because you're able to spend more time with family. We're able to make more money on the comparative on our side of the house. But second, this is the important push. I have significantly more economic productivity when my science friend is likely doing science to a much larger extent. When I know I am good at this, I am often able to actively better society. The weighing on this cannot be understated. Imagine having light bulbs 300 years sooner. Imagine having running water. Imagine Kantian philosophy and other things actively happening. Note that this means that you get significantly better architectural planners, significantly better people developing society, and this is the tipping point to liberalism within our world. It often changes the comparative that exists on our side of the house. The tangible impact cannot be understated of economic productivity because more people get jobs, more people get houses, and more people just access development in general on our side of the house. Third piece of weighing, minorities do significantly better on our side of the house. The reason for this is really, really simple. Minorities often have very few resources on their side of the house. So when you want to explore and there are 70 different things in front of you, you really cannot do that. It's very difficult to on their side of the house at the point where you cannot engage in these types of things. The comparative on our side is twofold. 1, as a minority, I don't have to look for what I am good at. If I know I am good at science, I can invest my time in this. This is different from being able to take 7 extracurriculars and being able to figure that out. So I'm often able to get a better economic position. This means oppressed groups in particular have better economic mobility on the comparative on our side of the house and are able to push themselves to a much larger extent. It means we're able to get money to these particular people who actively require it. They're vulnerable minorities who often do significantly better in the economic system when you know that you have a cutie mark about science, and when you can show this to your employer, when you can actively say, I want to do these types of things on the comparative, I think that's significantly better. Closing opposition before I move on.
Yeah, a big part of that case is predicated on this idea that, like, hey, you're the only individual who has this mark. If everyone in the entire market economy is doing the same path, getting into things sooner, can you provide any intuitive justification for why the extra wealth they generate would actually trickle down to them and improve their lives materially and not just make the rich class richer?
Yeah, so the reason for this is like a cutie mark for a rich person can also be about Spanish, right? And this is the second thing I was getting into. Why is societally this better? The first is obviously this gives you significant amounts of meaning. And the reason it gives you meaning is quite simple, right? If I know that I'm bad at things on their side of the house, on the comparative, the cutie mark actually tells me, no, you are good at this. You can continually do something that you are actually good at. Provides me hope and meaning on our side of the house on the comparative. Secondly though, and this is the important part because this knocks out opposition quite clearly, social norms develop differently. You often respect a wider variety of talents. The reason for this is that as a rich person, when I know my kid could get the cursive writing mark, I am inherently incentivized to create a norm that respects these types of things. So all cutie marks are likely to be respected because 1, a rich person's child could have the really shitty cutie mark that they want to talk about. So social norms are more malleable on our side of the house to change societal structures. Secondly, obviously, you are more incentivized to be able to opt into things that your cutie mark wanted. Opening opposition's claim is you don't have the capacity to. But this actively ups your capacity, right? No one wanted to be a farmer. On the comparative, when you have the cutie mark, you can show it to Socrates that I'm going to be good at philosophy in the past as well, which increases the capacity to be able to opt in. Very, very simple weighing. The comparative is arbitrary markers that actively determine this genetically. Our side is markers that are significantly more real and tangible. Very proud to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank the Deputy Prime Minister for the very fine speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition here.
Awesome. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Fantastic. Few quick notes before beginning. First, huge thank you to Brian for being a fantastic and amazing partner. And no, I did not carry you. The opposite is more true. And thanks to Spar for running a fantastic tournament, and Muzi and the entirety of GovBench, I'm sure, for what we'll hear later. And Dennis for a fantastic Gov case. And CO, of course. I'm sure that'll be lots of fun. Anyways. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. The question at the core of this debate is actually about human nature. The question is, in the face of uncertainty, do people assume the best or do people assume the worst? Because the premise behind opening government is that under our side of the house, you never know really for sure what your talent is. And that uncertainty breeds negativity. The process of seeking sucks. And people often feel profoundly dissatisfied with their lives. By contrast, our case is that uncertainty is uplifting. You can lie to yourself and feel like what you are doing is your talent, even when in fact it's not. Structurally, our argument is more persuasive. The way humans evolved over time was to reward people who experimented and explored, and rewarded people who convinced themselves that what they were doing was what they were good at, even if in fact that was untrue. The way we evolved collective human society, the way we survived in the wild, and the way that our brains became hardwired over time constructed rewards for us believing that we were good at what we were doing and that what we were occupying our time with was in fact our talent. This framing crucially mitigates the power of opening government's case because uncertainty is a blessing on our side of the house and ignorance is itself bliss. The problem for opening government is they lock people into a realistic and objective belief that they are not ever doing what they are actually best at doing. The vast majority of people historically did not have the flexibility to change their job or massively shift their life outcomes. It was under our side we gave people the mental flexibility to feel like their life had meaning. Opening government robbed them of that. Let's look at the 3 premises underlying opening government and knock each out. Premise number 1. Impactful will this birthmark be? Opening government is markedly inconsistent on this question. At some parts in opening government's case, it seems like this is a pretty insignificant mark. It's just an additional piece of information, but you'll make decisions independent of this anyways. At other parts in opening government's case, this mark effectively dictates your life. It's what determines whether you specialize early or not. Here is why structurally people will attach a tremendous amount of importance to this mark and in doing so become mentally stressed. Firstly, this is omnipresent. Literally every morning you wake up, every time you get ready for the day, you are reminded physically and viscerally of what you are best at and what you are not. Secondly, this motion intersects with religion. And for the vast majority of human history, how would people have viewed these marks? Almost certainly as a sign from God of what you are preordained to do. I'll later explain why this comprehensively flips opening government's case on discrimination by providing a powerful theological justification for the very caste systems opening government is terrified of. But the fact people likely associate this mark with religion and God's will likely suggests people attach a tremendous amount of meaning to this. But also, the entirety of opening government's case explicitly makes arguments about why you will act and make major life decisions on the basis of this mark. Why does this framing matter? People will attach a great amount of weight to what is or is not on their hip. That breeds mental anguish for all the reasons that Brian explains, and therefore beats Muzi's responses about why, no, you'll still explore anyways. The second premise in opening government's case is that pursuing your talent is good for your happiness. In fact, it's the opposite for 3 reasons. Firstly, maybe Muzi is right and you specialize early on their side, but that often leads to burnout because on their side of the house, you as young as 12 years old know this is what I'm best at. You are then encouraged through capitalist norms, through religion, through your priests, through your parents, through your teachers to pursue that talent. That will, for all of opening government's reasons, bring you prosperity and bring you happiness. But that often means people burn out too early. It means the person who would have been fantastic at math had they pursued it in their 20s now spends far too much time in their early years, often leading to emotional distress. Secondly, commercializing one's passions is a pathway to hell. Very few people truly find meaning in making their talent their work. In many cases, you prefer to pursue your talent outside of a working context because you do not commercialize that passion. There is not a boss dictating how you use that talent. It is opening government's own case that explains why capitalist norms, narratives, and institutions now evolve around these birthmarks to encourage people to pursue the career path with tracks one-to-one onto their mark. Under our side, people have greater flexibility and often opt to not work in a field in which they are directly most talented, hence allowing them to find greater meaning. The third premise in open in government's case is that people have some level of flexibility. It's strange open in government attacks us for being a team that doesn't prove that people can change, but the problem on their side of the house is 99% of human beings in all of history would never have been able to act upon this mark. They were working in the fields. 18 hours of their day was predetermined. The vast majority of human beings never got satisfaction out of their job. But on their side, you reaffirm that displeasure because you know for sure as hell that you were never doing that which you were meant to do. The last part of the speech I want to talk about is happiness and discrimination. Before I do that, though, I'll take CG.
Yeah, okay, so all of this is premised on the idea that if you knew there were, like, minorities who are really good at math or politics or war, you would just, like, exclude them as the upper class. Why is that in your incentive?
About discrimination now, this argument should not be the most important impact in the debate. In our case, is about the micro impacts, not the macro. You should deprioritize this argument in weighing, not only because open in government's case is markedly inconsistent, apparently people aren't sharing these marks, but also because in most instances, stereotypes emerge post hoc. People are forced into specific fields, which they would be on either side of the house. They subsequently then are stereotyped as being good at that field. The problem is on their side of the house, once the stereotype emerges, then people selectively utilize this birthmark evidence to prove the stereotype. But the more important problem for the discrimination argument is just that on their side of the house, it's very likely that you then associate the career path someone is working in with their birthmark. Because if open in government's right and you specialize in that which your birthmark has indicated you are good at, then people tacitly assume this person is working in this field because they specialized early, as PM and DPM say. Under our side, there is more flexibility. It's easier to disprove stereotypes, to say, no, this person is working in this field but is not a member of a certain race. So you validate stereotypes more so on their side. But even if we lose the clash on discrimination, this should be deprioritized in weighing. Many exogenous factors and structural forces keep people disadvantaged and disenfranchised. The marginal impact on social narratives is less important then than the more certain impact on day-to-day lives. So why do we get happier lives on our side of the house? Because under our side, you are more likely to find comfort in day-to-day activities. But also, you are more likely on their side to obsess over this mark, to feel in some sense like if you were given, for example, a bad talent, that you have been condemned by God, cursed to hell. And that is how the vast majority of people would historically have interpreted these marks. That if you are given a talent which seems insubstantial, it would have been felt like a curse to you, like you had actually been legitimately told that this was the best thing for you in life. The endpoint of the OO case is simple. Discrimination is not the real place this debate happens, and caste systems are validated more so on their side and awash at worst. But happiness is destroyed on their side, and hence we oppose.
Alright, I'd like to thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for the very fine speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Member of Government here.
Okay, cool. So, POIs in chat, I will take, top half, around 5 or so, non-verbally. And let me just rearrange these papers real quick, then we can get started. Okay. Also audible, right? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. Choice is a boot on the neck of every oppressed group in the world, because the choice is not theirs. The choice is of the oppressed group that looks at them and has to decide whether to take a risk on them, whether to buck the stereotype and employ that next, female member of NASA, female doctor, black engineer, or whether they will stick with the status quo. This is the single easiest way to destroy that problem. We're going to give you a very simple extension on breaking discriminatory hierarchies down and then integrate a lot of weighing and rebuttal into that. On that extension, how do we break down discriminatory hierarchies? First, we do it at the individual level. And opening gov here says, well, you know you're good at like science, so you can try to do that and not have to, mess around with a bunch of other things. I think actually many minorities know that they are good at something early on, right? Children who have an intuitive sense of how numbers work and believe that they are good at math. The problem is not that. The problem is they are discouraged by bad norms that say because of your race, because of your gender, you will never be good and you should shut out that voice in your head that says that you can succeed. We fix this by providing long-term durability in 3 ways. First, support externally. You have parents that see that you are good at this thing because they see the mark. Teachers who see that and say, even if I have this racial preconception or this gendered preconception, I know factually that this person can succeed if I support them. You have bosses who, when you go to them and say, I can do well at this thing, they believe you because the evidence is in front of their eyes. Second, you try harder long term because you know you'll succeed. And this is really important because people will tell you, there are these norms that say you're never going to do well, right? But I can look at my hip every day and say the effort I'm putting in, the sweat, blood, and tears is all going to be worth it because I'm guaranteed some amount of skill and success. Third, acceptance of your efforts. OG says you're accepted more. Unclear why. Unclear why people can't reject you from a job for being racist. Here's the real reasons. It is impossible to externally justify discrimination since the proof that you are wrong is so obvious, which your boss will see if you don't, accept somebody to a job based on their race, which means when you reject that person from a job, they will go to another job and help that corporation beat you in terms of end of quarter sales because they actually are more skilled, or even legally, right? It's usable. You can go to court and say, look, I didn't get fired from that job because I'm bad. I got fired because of my gender, and I have proof on my hip that that's the case. Second, socially, you have, and this is like the other part of the breaking discriminatory hierarchies thing. First, you have political movements that can use this. Because when you want to campaign for something like more inclusion of women in the workplace, you can literally point to thousands upon millions of women who all have proof that they are good at math, that they are good at writing, that they can succeed in business and politics, and you can put those people on TV, you can point to physical evidence that can be shown and distributed. And note, it's really easy for those movements to win insofar as the evidence is really easy to convey because the clarifications channel says everybody knows what the symbols mean. So when you show a bunch of women on TV, everybody understands the implication of that, and it's very hard for an abstract stereotype to counteract it. The second way this works is in terms of religious movements that support this, because you now have proof of God's grace in making all groups of people in the world, regardless of race and nationality, talented at a variety of things, which means they often support this as proof that their narratives are correct, that God is benevolent and hasn't left any of his people behind. Why do social hierarchical conditions not stop this process? Because OO says, well, poor people can't change jobs, that's going to be really hard. 2 things. 1, there is an incentive for inclusion. If you are a rich king or something, you want to send people to those farms in the countryside. You want to get the people who have these symbols. You want to, in the modern day, give scholarships to universities and inclusion in jobs because you know that those people will benefit you. You know that my kingdom or my business will be dramatically stronger if I include these people because they have skills that are really valuable to me. So even if it would be hard for poor people to do it on their own, other people help them. Second, you have ways to develop even in poverty. You can move to a new city with the little savings you have or nothing because you know you'll get a job, right? Because you can show this symbol to other people and prove, look, you should hire me because of this, even if you don't know what part of the country I'm from. You can spend on new education or new tools to change trades because you know that it will work, and so you have confidence and can justify to your family why you're making that investment. Even if you have no money, you can try hard because when you study basic physics with an old textbook that's not perfect, you know that it will pay off. So even if you have to do an exponentially larger amount of work because your resources are lower, you still do those things insofar as you're aware that it's going to pay off. Why do forces of progress beat out forces of discrimination? 3 things. 1, the popular perception of correctness. This is clear, everybody sees it, it is an obvious thing you can put in front of the masses. Second, there is factional competition amongst powerful groups. That is to say, the powerful groups, like the political parties or the, ethnic or religious groups in a country that choose to take those minorities or take those poor people on their side can outcompete the other groups that are also powerful as a sort of a tiebreaker, right? Because they're the ones who now have the vast majority of positive human capital. Third is just that this never develops in the first place. At the point where since the beginning of time, people have this, I think you get hierarchy hierarchies that develop around those skills, which means they are much more multiracial, much more multigender, and exclude the worst forms of discrimination. Any POI from top half here?
The causality in your extension is backwards. Elites developed discriminatory systems to appease in-groups and demonize others. Stereotypes then emerged to justify those systems, but stereotypes didn't cause discrimination, they're just symptoms of it. Discrimination doesn't change.
But the problem is that you can't do that discrimination if you literally can be proven wrong on those matters factually, and if everybody knows that it will hurt them to do that discrimination as a group. Okay, impacts three things. One, social change for individuals can benefit others, right? When you move to that new city to get a new job because you have that confidence, you send home remittances. Your family income increases. You have an increased ability to move for work, which means your kids are better off. You go into a new trade, you change their educational pathway. Second, you change hierarchies as a whole, right? Less discrimination, less structural versions of this, an upper class that is more diverse and inclusionary. Third, you get baseline people who I think are considered a lot better, right? So it's not just exceptional examples, but everybody is seen as having this potential. Weighing this against the individualism clash, one, the material stuff that we talk about, like the potential to change serious racial hierarchies, are more proximate to people than stuff like whether they can pursue their passion, because this is the baseline level of existence needed to access those other things, like how much food do you get, how brutal are the police to you. Second, you prevent the worst atrocities. That is to say, even if there are hierarchies around certain kinds of skills, you don't get hierarchies that demonize people based on race, that say they're not human, because some of those people have to be accepted, which means you prevent the worst kind of things like colonialism and genocide. Third, on time frame, it's longer. We're not just talking about one person, we're talking about generational change. It doesn't vary from person to person. It is consistent in increasing people's incomes and livelihoods. Never prouder to propose.
Alright, I'd like to thank the member of government for the verifying speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the member of opposition here.
All right. POI preference in the chat, please. Yeah, if I don't reply to it quickly, or like if I don't reply to it in a minute, let's say you can verbal, but I'll do my best to reply to them in a timely manner. Okay. My time can start now. Now, panel, I want to get out in front and make it clear, I'm pretty sure this is an auto CO1. Every other team in this debate conflated the phrase most talented, go read the info slide, it's right there, with good at. What do I mean by this? Why is this important, right? Every single other argument that every other team made this entire debate is predicated on the idea that if the thing you are most talented at, you are also good at. Entirely neglected in this entire debate is the reality that out of 8 billion people, for a huge chunk of these people, they're going to suck at the thing they're most talented at, right? I'm going to get onto this with some positive matter, why this is a huge problem, why this outweighs everything else in the debate. But first, I kind of want to go point by point and give some examples of the flaw of this logic that's introduced when every other team in this debate kind of just like, yeah, most talented equals good at. No, let's give some examples. First, CG says it will be easy to include women in STEM because you can point to a huge amount who are good at it, right? They use that phrase good at it, but that's available in modern society too, right? There are a huge amount of women who lead successful careers in STEM who are extremely good at it by all possible standards. Yet women are still overwhelmingly underrepresented in STEM. Why? Because sexists believe simultaneously that women, the thing they're most talented at, can be STEM, and that they are still worse than the average man who's talented at STEM. That's a core belief that sexists hold, right? They don't have any objections to the thing a woman is best at being STEM. They just don't believe she's as capable as an average man. Why is this important? Because even in the world where a bunch of women have that STEM cutie mark, right, or whatever or the quantum physics cutie mark, let's say to be a little more specific and fair to OG's framing, even in that world, CG's case has a big flaw, which is, yeah, I'm sure there will be someone who's like, we should hire more women at this firm because look how many have the mark. Sexists will still reject reality. They will still ignore that. CG can't access any of their impacts, and they will still say, yeah, I'm sure all those women are good at STEM. If no men apply, we should hire one of those, but I'd still rather go with the first man, right? And you could extrapolate this kind of logic to basically any other type of like inequity that's been discussed in this debate. People who are looking for inequities, these aren't things based in ration in the first place, so I don't see why introducing another rational element or indicator is going to tip this balance. Okay, another good example. CG says you can make investments in a field because you're confident it will work out because you're good at it. Once again, this assumes you'll be good at the thing you're most talented at. Let me give a metaphor here. Think about college athletes who get drafted first in a draft, like maybe they're objectively the best in whatever country they're drafted in because they got drafted first, right? And they get injured. No contract, no career, no future. Now they left college early, have no degree, are years behind in the workforce, have an expensive injuries to deal with, and won't be able to pursue the thing they're good at. This is a horribly, brutally, morally debilitating outcome, right? And this is a very rare case in the status quo, I'll admit. But this would genuinely happen to millions of people in Gov's world, right? When you have millions of people that are dealing with essentially this exact same situation where, hey, the thing you're best at, maybe it's boxing, maybe it's quantum physics, you know what? Maybe it's translating, and then halfway through starting to pursue that field, you get in an accident, you break an arm, you lose your hearing because of an accident. Boom! You know you will never, ever, ever irreparably be able to access the thing you are best at, that you have sunk time into, that you've sunk energy into, that you assumed was an automatic given. And on top of that, everyone else in society, if we buy CG's logic, who was able to kind of coast through, get what they wanted, and if you buy OG's logic, who now has more free time for their passions, will be looking down on you, pursuing their passions, while you have to go work something you know what shouldn't have been your first choice. This is so much more worse than the status quo. It's unbelievably magnified. Finally, OG says you enjoy doing things you're good at. This kind of underpins like so much of their positive matter, right? I mean, first of all, I'm not even sure if this is true because a huge amount of people enjoy building new skills, learning new things, and getting good at things. They only ever intuition pumped. They even POI'd asking why you inherently always enjoy things you're good at. They just said, you just do. But let's just say it's true, right? Let's assume that they actually gave some justification. What about the people who aren't good at the thing they're best at? And this brings me into our first main extension. This is different than opening opposition's case, because they talked about misery too, because we're talking about a more extreme case. Feeling bad because someone else is better than you at the thing you're best at is honestly non-unique. That happens a lot in the status quo. Maybe it would happen more in that world. I think OO has some good ground there. We're going to go much farther to a case that extremely rarely, like the college athlete I talked about, happens in this world, right? We hit OG hard too, because we're going to tell you, OG is all about you'll be happy when you do stuff you're good at. You know what? Maybe that's true. If it's true, they're going to be in big trouble when people just can't find something they're good at. Panel, this debate is about how cutie marks tell you what you're best at. You may not be good at that thing. Okay, first of all, we're talking about misery here. That a good chunk of the population will be bad at the thing they're best at. But first, a POI from OG. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to move on. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm just going to move.
The best case on your side of the house is that certain degrees of exploitation are likelier to happen. That's because you can't actually do the exploration that opening and closing opposition want, because it costs lots of money, because you can't actually find what you're good at. So you never get to lie to yourself about what you're good at.
Okay, yeah, I get the point. First of all, panel, I haven't advocated for exploration once. I'm not sure what speech that speaker is listening to. I want to move on with my case now and talk about, I'm not even necessarily arguing that the status quo is this awesome, amazing world. I'm just saying the alternative of cutie marks is so immensely miserable that for so many people that it's obviously not a preferable reality, which I think is more than sufficient to win in this kind of debate. Why is it probable that a huge chunk of the population will be bad at the thing they're best at? First, sheer quantity, 8 billion people, right? If even 0.0001% of these people are just bad at genuinely everything, right? Then that's a significant chunk of people, especially when looking at the historical example. Probably 20 billion people, I'm just ballparking, who knows, definitely more than 8 billion have ever been alive, and all of them will be dealing with this. Second reason, accidents. What if your talent is music and you lose hearing? I've already brought this up, right? This is another thing. Third thing, intuition pump, right? There are probably people we know, whether it's because of bad fortune or anything like that, who the thing that which they probably were most talented at, for whatever reason, they just end up not being able to do very well. Maybe it's external. Who knows what the reason is? Who cares? It's there, right? Why will people find out they're bad at it? Why won't they just live in ignorance? OG told us it's probable that most people will put energy into pursuing the thing their mark is relevant to. So when they put energy into that, when they're inevitably rejected for some reason or another, they'll find out, right? And also, OO brought up, eventually you'll encounter other people that give you a reference. So we're going to use that same mech. Yes, we'll get some external references. 4 reasons this is the worst possible thing that could happen to you when we win this debate. Number 1, it gets rid of hope. OO talked about this, but I don't think they went anywhere near far enough. Right? There is genuinely no hope you will find something else you're better at. I think this is the most agonizing existential suffering that you could subject a human to. Telling them this is the thing you're best at, definitively, objectively, religiously, like CG wanted to talk about. God ordained for you to do this thing, and you suck at it. You are incapable of doing it. I honestly, panel, just if you could imagine a more miserable experience, maybe sort of death or extreme pain, I can't think of it. Right? No coping mechanisms. You have objective, rational-based understanding, a factual mark telling you this. You can't blame incompetency on bad luck or God or family or schooling. You are forced to just fully cope with it, take the burden on yourself, take the blame yourself. And even if you can cope, you'll probably be economically damaged, magnifying your misery, because employers will be curious, much as when you have a gap in your resume, why you're not spending time doing the thing you're best at. Finally, you'd be surrounded by everyone else in society with a constantly normalized and visible reminder that other people are good at the thing you're best at and you're not. Clear impact, misery, maximization. That's 2 M's alliteration. Thank you, panel.
Alright, I'd like to thank the member of opposition for the very fine speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the Gumwhip here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The first thing I want to address is the closing half. Their first criticism of our case is that racists on either side of the house will often just try to rationalize discrimination. I have two simple responses to this. Firstly, Eli's extension works upstream of this. That is to say, since this house prefers argument, racism or the structural discrimination that happens doesn't happen in the first place insofar as you have indisputable evidence that allows you to expose such forms of discrimination. There's also much more buy-in into your messaging insofar as you have actual active evidence that allows you to actively oppose these types of things. Number two, I think it's also the fact you get more exposure of these false beliefs on our side of the house, right? Because if you were a racist and you were trying to justify, let's say that like a man good at math is better than a woman good at math, you often have to test this, and insofar as you do have to test this over time, you force competition, in which case your belief is proven wrong, so you're forced to actually test this insofar as there's active evidence in front of you which you have to confront, which means that over time, our mechanism acts as a corrective thing against the very type of thing that they themselves talk about. The second key thing that comes from closing opposition is their idea of like what if you're born with like an unmarketable or non-useful skill? Two responses. Firstly, I think all skills are transferable to some degree. So let's say, let's take them at their best case. You're born with like a skill in art, which is not as marketable as, let's say, being good at math. The problem with that is that you can still use art through other ways. Like you can do marketing for a company. You can do, for example, ways in which you can design graphics and advertisements or other parts of the corporate world. The difference is on our side of the house. If you're born with such a skill, the difference is on op side. You're forever trying to trying to find a way to you spend time exploring your interest, and then you spend time trying to make sure. Then you realize you're good at art. Then you spend time trying to make that useful. On our side, you skip the first step. You know you're born with a skill in art, so over time you already have the immediate jump start to find a way to make it like more applicable and try to insert it into the actual and like try to make money from the actual skill you were given rather than having to explore that in the first place. Given that, CO is practically out. Let's move on to opening opposition. Their first claim is about self-exploration, right? I want to know two things here. Firstly, the very example they give contradicts them, right? The Ashish example they give, wherein Ashish knows that he's bad at music, yet he still does it, proves that people stay in things that makes them happy, even though they're not bad at it. This means that, like, just empirically speaking, you do things even though you're bad at it, even if like society says it's a waste of time, because it makes you practically happy. But the second thing I want to note here is that, like, they say capitalism tells you that it's a waste of time when you do these types of things. I'm tired of these capitalism debates because capitalism isn't the only force driving your life. You have other forces, like being an interesting person to other people. So you often try to engage in other hobbies which may not be productive, like let's say reading a new book, watching a new Netflix film, and things like that, because you want to be like an interesting person to other people, because there's another force that acts in your life. This means that if capitalism is a force that makes you do something productive, other forces in your life also make you do things that are fun, that make you happy, and things like that, which also means we achieve the self-exploration thing that they themselves talk about. The second thing they say is that, people feel bad because they're unable to succeed due to like structural discrimination. And this was an argument present in the first speaker. The first thing I want to do is that Eli's extension preempts this. Because the problem is, yeah, your side, they do fail because of structural discrimination. What we do is we fix, or at least we speed up the process in which such structural discrimination is fixed. Therefore, we succeed much sooner. Number two, even if you disregard the first response, I think you're unlikely to succeed. If you're unlikely to succeed on either side anyways, I think you're worse off on their side. The reason for this is because if you do not succeed and you know you're good at math, like you're actually talented at it, or you're good at politics, but you still didn't get employed, you blame society because the skills is it that society didn't want to employ me. So you pin the burden on society. The comparative is, if you do not have such evidence confirming your actual skills, you blame it on yourself, saying, I did not work hard enough. I did not put in enough effort in this. So if their case is about people feeling bad, I flip that and show why it's worse off coming from opening opposition. I'll weigh against that much later on, but the thing I want to do now is to weigh against opening government. So I think opening government does provide us two key arguments, right? The first is it allows you to better plan for your life and to like allocate time into things that make you happy. The second thing is on productivity and and how you can specialize in things like that. The first thing I just want to note here is that these arguments have very marginal delta for middle to upper middle income groups. This is simply true for two reasons. Firstly, you have available resources. You can already do things like tests, counseling to explore what you're good at, which means that at a very early age, you already have that idea and can pursue and put in effort there. You also have financial cushioning should you fail. So from early on, you already know what you want. The second thing is that there are already existing narratives that say you can be anything you want. So you're able to you pursue things that you're actually good at. This means that the fulcrum of this debate should not be about middle class or upper middle class income individuals, but for minorities and disprivileged groups. So this is where you have to weigh us against our OG case, because in terms of upper middle income class people, the effect is really marginal. So the metric we should weigh this on is on marginal groups. So how does the OG's claim on marginal group compare to our claim on marginal groups? So OG tries to say that minorities benefit because they now know what they're good at. Why is this insufficient? The reason why this is insufficient is because they never talk about the actual systemic structure that exists. That is to say, even if you know you're good at something and you put your time in there as a minority, you won't succeed unless the system itself changes. This is because no matter how good you are, it doesn't matter if your boss doesn't recognize your efforts or even worse, feels threatened by you as an individual. Before I move on, opening opposition.
Non-economic factors like fear and religion drive discrimination, and even if you reduce that type of discrimination, it's just replaced by a new type of discrimination on the basis of these marks. So the plausibility and scale of your impact are lesser than top half.
No. Two responses to that. Firstly, we already addressed the religious part. If it's seen as a divine symbol, right? So it's easier to justify there. But the second thing is this exists upstream of discrimination. So it's easier to counter it when it hasn't developed yet, when it's at its weakest, which means you have greater ability to actually counter this. How does Eli fill in this necessary mechanism which talks about the system itself? The first thing he talks to you is about checks, right? You get solid conglomerated evidence based on race that shows us indisputable evidence that there was actual discrimination. The second thing he tells you is about social movements and that they ally with you on our side of the house. Thirdly, he tells you that you get more internal and external support from these movements and other types of individuals. Fourthly, you don't have stereotypes form as much in the first place and you're able to combat them before they even become entrenched in society. Lastly, the actual hierarchies can change over history, which only happens on our side of the house. OG's case cannot materialize without the necessary systemic changes, and we fill that gap in. For all those reasons and more, very proud to propose.
All right, I'd like to thank the government whip for the very fine speech. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome the opposition whip here.
I assume I can be heard?
Yep.
Okay, give me a second to set up my timer. And yeah, before I start, I had a great time debating at this tournament. Thank you for everyone for hosting. Thank you for everyone who are in finals. Yeah, excited to be done as well. So hopefully I'll be quick. I'll start on my first word. In closing opposition, we believe that the worst thing you can tell an individual is tell them that out of all the skills that you may have within you, you are best at X. But here's the problem. A Cutie mark is an internal comparison between all the skills within you. But being good at a job by societal standards is relative to other people. And here's a little bit of My Little Pony specs that I don't think anyone had. Another reason to vote for CO is like My Little Pony, a story that focuses on 7 distinct ponies that have different cutie marks and different skills. There are more than 1 billion people on Earth. This means that there's a clear, probable, statistical chance that different people will have the same mark. But that also means that these people will presumably have to compete for jobs. This is because even if there are different people who are allocated to different cutie marks and different things they're good at, jobs are paternally determined by demands of people. This means that if you have 10 accountants, you might not need 10 accountants. You're still, at the end of the day, going to have to fight for those 3 positions. The implication of this framing and clarification is that even if you are a person that's best at accounting, out of all the skills that you may have, you might not be the best accountant in the world. But the problem is that this narrative tells you that you're supposed to be good at this, that you have no other way to escape this, that if you're bad at this, you can't blame anyone else but yourself. Brian says that he's bad at debate. This is not true, by the way. And that if they knew better, they would have done something else and they would have not debated. But guys, here's what feels worse. That is, if Brian was marked as a natural debater because he's best at debate over anything else, but the reason he's not world's champion is purely because there are other people also with this mark that are better than him. I would argue that this level of existential misery is way worse than any individual happiness that you get from the opening arguments. The bottom line of this argument is that the uncertainty that comes with the lack of a cutie mark is not good because of what O tells you, but that it gives you avenue to find blame for being bad in comparison to other people. And that is the fundamental case in closing opposition, unique reason to vote for us. Now weigh this against every other case. OG tells you that people will have better lives because they specialize sooner and the macroeconomy gets better. There's three responses here. Firstly, everyone will specialize sooner anyway, so the average individual presumably has no inherent advantage. Secondly, it's unclear why a more productive economy will result in more time for the average individual to do hobbies because the US has gotten richer and more productive, and yet workday is still completely shit and people don't have time to do hobbies. Lastly, their entire case about money and efficiency is contingent upon the link of you actually being good and getting a job. Guess what our extension does? It tells you that most people don't have access to those jobs anyways, because even if it's the best skill that you have, you might not be good enough relative to other people. So that prevents you and historically lock you from that job in the first place. So you might end up having to do things that you don't like, which is probably super miserable. And beyond that, we outweigh anyways, right? Even for all the XYZ reasons that they say why you're gonna feel better anyways, we outweigh because we would say that feeling miserable and not being able to find blame for your failure and missteps in life is probably going to feel way worse as an existential misery. Second thing we want to engage with is then CG. CG's argument is kind of out of all of this stuff, right? Like their argument is just like, look, you break discriminatory hierarchies on their side because you don't let racism or like sexism arise in the first place because you don't have the evidence to actively, because you would now have evidence to actively push against that. But this logic is flawed because stereotypes did not exist and were used to justify discrimination. It's the other way around, that discrimination created stereotypes in the first place. Discrimination has never been a question of capacity. It was always about the incentive because the capacity was always its maximum. Because when you have majority of people who hold majority of political and economic power in society, it doesn't matter what type of evidence you can hold against them. They have the power to discriminate you in the first place. So discrimination developed and emerged because, sexism emerged because men wanted to entrench their power over women indefinitely. That doesn't change. And this is clearly a solution mismatch anyways, because again, our extension tells you that just because this is your best skill doesn't mean that you're able to use this evidence to pit against other people. So it's not that you as a woman are not good at STEM, but that when you're equally good as another man, they would just pick the man because that is the incentive to do so. And this motion just doesn't solve anything because you don't show them a cutie mark and they think you're immediately better. They don't, because there are other men that presumably probabilistically can also have this mark. It doesn't matter. Nothing really changes. CG's out of this debate. Before I go on, I'll take a POI from opening government.
Yeah, your case is hung on the idea that people are a flexible blank slate, but in status quo, as an Asian, you're told you must be good at math, that you must do or become a doctor. So this is at least comparatively more liberating when you're able to, at the very least, choose different types of careers, unlike what opening opposition or you say, where exploration isn't actually open. Discrimination is also symmetric because we told you that an opening. Very practical.
Well,
yeah.
I think that's our case. Our case is that, presumably, right? People can choose what they do, and that was what you try to symmetricize on either side of the house anyways. It was whether they wanted to explore or whether they should go with what their cutie mark tells them because there's XYZ benefits. We tell you that even if you go with what your cutie marks tells you, you're not necessarily inherently going to get the job because there's inherent market forces. That means that demand is not necessarily high as supply. You might not be able to get, there might not just be that many spots. And when you are one of these 7 accountants out of 10 that don't get the job because, I don't know, the market doesn't need that many, and that even if that is what you're good at, other people are better than you, you have no avenue to blame other people. You can't blame luck, you can't blame other things, you can't blame inherent genetics because you're told when you're born that this is what you're supposed to do. So if you can't get the job, it's probably because you suck. How do we weigh against opening opposition? Opening opposition gives pretty good arguments about why exploring passion is good because there's some inherent benefit that comes with that, and that weighs pretty well against opening government. I think that we outweigh just straight up because I think the impacts are relatively speculative and also apply to smaller groups of people. Some people might think that exploring passion is time consuming. OG is correct that if you're able to maybe find what you're good at without even having to try is sometimes good. It's also true that it might be better to be well-rounded because you can get other skills while you're looking for your passion. It might also be true either side has its own benefits, but I think this is contingent upon two things. That number one is contingent upon the type of people you're targeting, because some people just want to spend more time exploring their passion and want to be more well-rounded. Other people might not. But that also, there are some people who just want to earn as much as possible for as soon as possible. So finding what they want is probably the best thing and the best way to go forward. This means that inherently, no matter how many structural reasons opening opposition tells you, they're not able to completely prove the impact of this because it fundamentally depends on other things. And there's no reason why inherently finding your passion early or what you're good at is necessarily a bad thing. Our reason is structurally far more persuasive and concrete, because most individuals probably hate the fact that they can't blame other people for not getting a job. And you can't do that under this motion, because this Cutie mark constantly reminds you that this is what you're supposed to be good at, and that if you're not, it's probably because of your own fault. We regret this motion terribly, and please vote for closing opposition.